Arsenal just dominated Real Madrid 3-0, and it was a tactical masterclass by Mikel Arteta. But how did he exactly do it? Let's take a look. This would be the part where if somebody was actually good at video editing, would put a transition in here, but I'm not. So this is your transition into what was an incredible match at the Emirates. 3-0 to the Arsenal, two magical free kicks from Declan Rice. But outside of those magical free kicks, there were some very interesting tactical things that Arsenal was able to do in the match and really give Real Madrid a lot of problems, especially in Real Madrid's 4-4-2 low block. So early on in the first half, one aspect that was very clear is that Arsenal was trying to do what Manchester City was doing. You know, Manchester City built up in a 2-3-5 against Real Madrid and was constantly getting 5v3 or 5v4 overloads and forcing Real Madrid to play very, very narrow. Well, Arsenal started out in a 2-3-5, and then they quickly transitioned to a 3-2-5 and inverted Miles Lewis Skelly. What that did was is not necessarily them playing through the middle, but it caused Real Madrid to stay very narrow. And then situations like this, where Odegaard is able to get into the right half space because Vinicius Jr. and Mbappe just don't really do much defensive work. Bellingham is now in a very difficult position. They were picking on Bellingham quite often, especially in the first half. And what that's able to do is they are able to isolate Bukayo Saka 1v1 against David Alaba. You know, Alaba is coming off a year-long knee injury, so him going 1v1 against Saka is not the greatest matchup for Real Madrid. So you can see here in the second image that Saka has so much space to run into. Now, he doesn't really do anything with this, but what Bellingham kept having to do was come and help David Alaba in these type of situations. So these are the type of things that you're going to see from Arsenal throughout most of this match. And as the match progressed and Real Madrid fell behind, the gaps in the middle started to open up, and Arsenal's third goal came as a result of them playing through the middle. Now, one thing that I think was really underrated that maybe not a lot of people were talking about from this match was just how good Arsenal was in transition defense. You know, Real Madrid's best chances of the match came off just dumb mistakes by Arsenal in the first half. You know, Kiwar very early on, like in the first minute, completely just missed a ball, allowed Mbappe to get it behind. I think it was Timber who made a pass backwards, essentially right to Vinicius Jr., who freed up Mbappe to get in behind. But you know, though that was basically it for Real Madrid. You know, you can see from the image right here, Arsenal's transition defense. This is after a corner. You know, Real Madrid cleared the corner and went right to Vinicius Jr. And look how many players Arsenal is able to get back against Real Madrid's front three. They can't really break against that. So, you know, that is an aspect that was very underrated. In total for the match, you know, Real Madrid created half an expected goal, and they only took three shots in the second half. Like they were trailing for most of the second half, and they were only able to muster up three shots. That's just how good Arsenal's defense was, and it was their defense in transition. And we'll, as we'll get to later, them defending in a very low block as we'll look forward to the second leg. Now, what was great about Arsenal's buildup, and I'm going to show you an image right here, is they were building up in a 3-2-5 and inverting Miles Lewis Skelly, like I already mentioned. But what this does right here is because it forces Real Madrid's front two to shadow Arsenal's double pivot. Otherwise, you know, Arsenal essentially has a 5v4 overload through the second phase of buildup. So if they shadow them, then Arsenal can just freely pass the ball around their front three. And what this also does is, as you can see, like I already mentioned, it forces Real Madrid to stay very narrow. And by staying very narrow, as long as, you know, they're in this type of structure, Bukayo Saka and Martinelli are going to be 1v1 against the fullbacks every single time. And because of the positioning of Declan Rice and of Odegaard here, if Arsenal's able to get the ball to one of those two guys, or let's say in this situation, look at all the space that Timber has to push up on the right, Arsenal can very easily get a 3v2 overload. Now, we'll get to that in a second. Now, from a Real Madrid perspective, they were trying to control possession early. They were trying to slow things down. You know, they were trying to play through Arsenal's pressure, although they weren't doing it very successfully. When they got the ball into the final third, they weren't really finding much space through the middle of Arsenal's defensive block. So what they were trying to do, and as you can see from the image right here, is they were trying to create the wide overloads. In this image here, you can see that Jude Bellingham and Camavinga, the double pivot midfielders, are trying to push over to the right side of the pitch. And an underrated aspect of it is the fact that Rodrigo and Vinicius Jr. really did nothing from a progression standpoint. I'm showing you this here from Mark Stats of all the best players in terms of progressive carries and progressive passes. They really weren't doing anything. So creating these wide overloads, what it does is it tries to freeze them up and hopefully allows their wingers to get in 1v1 situations, but it just never happened for Real Madrid. Now, back to Arsenal. They can be so difficult to defend because of these fluid rotations. So, like I just mentioned a little bit ago, with Real Madrid playing very narrow, if like a situation like this where Odegaard dropped into the back line and Timber pushed out to the right, because Vinicius Jr. is not doing much defensive work and he's too worried about covering Thomas Partey here in the middle of the pitch, that left Arsenal in these, excuse me, left Real Madrid in these type of situations where if Timber's able to push up and out wide and Odegaard's able to freely run, what is Jude Bellingham supposed to do? He's got to cover two guys because David Alaba has to be marking Bukayo Saka. Now, nothing actually comes of this sequence. Eventually, it's just a pass inverted to Bukayo Saka, and he tries to get in through it, and nothing happens. But it's these type of situations where Arsenal was getting into and causing Real Madrid a lot of problems. And like I said, picking on Jude Bellingham a lot, which is not necessarily the one guy you think they'd be picking on. And they obviously went down the right side of the pitch more often than not rather than the left side of the pitch, although Rodrigo had the same issues because he didn't know if he should stay tucked inside or if he should stay out wide to help those easy passes to Martinelli. But Arsenal had those easy passes out wide all match long. Another thing I want to highlight here is just how important, we talk about 1v1s, right? We talk about getting Bukayo Saka and these wingers in 1v1 situations. And I think I want to highlight the importance of that is not only is Bukayo Saka obviously one of the best right wingers in the world, but his pace and ball carrying ability can allow him to get by Alaba and get those crosses in the box. He's more of a creator for others than someone like, let's say, Mo Salah, for example, who's a creator to get his own shot. Not saying Bukayo Saka can't do that, but you see for the season, he's got already, I think, 10 or 11 assists. So in this image I'm showing you here, because Odegaard is able to tuck inside here and force Bellingham to essentially mark him, there's this gap of space that Bukayo Saka can just make a run right to the byline. And in this situation, he fizzed right across the box, which honestly was Arsenal's best chance. They didn't get on the end of it, but it was like the most dangerous chance they had, really for pretty much the entire match. So that was essentially what was happening in the first half. Obviously, it ended 0-0. Arsenal ended up creating about one expected goal for the first half. Real Madrid got a decent chance from Mbappe. Had about an XG rating, I think, of 0.28 on a break where he was able to get in behind, but that's all Real Madrid was able to do. Now, as we got into the second half, one of the things that Arsenal also did well is because Arsenal is one of the best teams at not only controlling matches in possession, but out of possession as well by winning duels and winning second balls. So you can see from the image I'm showing you here, this is off of Arsenal being able to press Real Madrid to force them to go long, which is basically what Real Madrid did every single time. When you do that, you are at the mercy of your forwards, either winning aerial duels or winning second balls. And as you can see from the image here, Mbappe or Vinicius Jr. or Rodrigo are not even close to winning this ball. And so Arsenal's able to get the ball, retain possession, and continue to tilt the field on Real Madrid. For the match, they had well over a 65% field tilt and really just controlled the match from that aspect. Now, as the match went along, Real Madrid was trying to find ways to get in. So they started dropping, killing Mbappe deep, as you can see from this image here, pushing Jude Bellingham up to the last line of defense. They kept pushing Jude. I'll get to that in a second. Actually, I'll just show it to you right here. So, Bellingham, after Arsenal fell down 1-0, Bellingham and Mbappe started pushing up and trying to essentially find space in between the lines, find that space in the middle of Arsenal's defensive block. But there was really no luck because Real Madrid wasn't playing balls over the top. They weren't really creating a midfield overload. So they were just kind of stuck. Like they didn't really know what to do because they couldn't isolate their wingers 1v1. They couldn't play the middle. It was just, it raises a lot of questions going into that second leg of how Real Madrid's actually going to break down Arsenal's low block. Now, I can't show you the image right here because of obviously because of copyright, but Declan Rice, incredible free kick in the 58th minute and then also the 70th minute. You can obviously go look at those videos on Twitter or wherever they have them. I'll include one beautiful image here of where he actually tucked this thing, kind of like a little Roberto Carlos around the block, which Roberto Carlos was actually in attendance for the match, which I thought was kind of funny. But this was from Mikel Arteta in the press conference as well. Arsenal hadn't scored a free kick since September of 2021. So it's been a very long time. To score two in that magnitude from a player who has never scored a free kick in his career before. I mean, what are the odds? Like, that's crazy, right? So I think a lot of people can walk away from this match and they can say, well, Arsenal got lucky on two Declan Rice free kicks. Like they really shouldn't have gone up 3-0. They only created 1.5 expected goals. And that's very true. Arsenal in total for the match did not create a lot of high quality chances. They were more trying to control the match, which they did an outstanding job of. But the third goal, which really kind of put the icing on the cake, I think was the importance of playing through the middle, like I mentioned earlier. So in the image I'm showing you here, Arsenal was able to get Partey and Moreno in a kind of a double pivot in the midfield, and they were able to find space and pass the ball through to each other. And what that did is as you can see from Rodrigo, who is right next to the ref here, is he doesn't really know what to do because Valverde moved into a midfield position when Lucas Vasquez came on, and since Moreno's able to beat Lucas Vasquez, excuse me, able to beat Valverde into the space here, Rodrigo's like, well, I have to cover him. So he comes up here and it creates a very easy pass to Declan Rice, who has, as you can see from this image here, just acres of space to run into. So what ends up happening is they get the ball wide to Trossard. Trossard is able to move it. Arsenal's kind of moving it back into the left half space. And because Real Madrid is retreating and because they're getting, trying to get into the box with Arsenal having so many players in the box, their defensive line gets too low and zone 14 kind of opens up a little bit below zone 14, excuse me, right at the top of the 18-yard box. And as you can see from the image here, I mean, Moreno, it's a great finish from Moreno, but he's asking for the ball because Real Madrid's defensive line got a little too low. So he's able to get a shot off and Arsenal goes up 3-0, and that's all she wrote. So, while Declan Rice's free kicks were incredible, and a lot of people can say, hey, Arsenal was a little bit fortunate to win 3-0. Yeah, they were fortunate, but they also controlled the match from start to finish, both in and out of possession. It was an incredible performance from the Gunners, and it gives them a very comfortable situation going to the Bernabeu. One of the questions you have to ask if you're Real Madrid is how are you going to play through Arsenal's defensive block? Because there's obviously situations where it would be advantageous for Arsenal in that second leg to come out and to press Real Madrid like they did. But if Arsenal just sits back in a 4-4-2 low block, Real Madrid's going to have to create out wide. They're going to have to isolate their wingers, and they showed no aspect of even really doing that in the first leg. So an incredible performance from Arsenal, a well-deserved victory, maybe not 3-0, but a well-deserved victory. And it really sets them up well for a great position to advance to the semifinals. So thank you everybody for watching this video. I'm hopefully going to have more of these type of videos coming out on my YouTube channel here. So if you could, please subscribe and let me know in the comments how wonderful that transition was at the beginning of this video. So enjoy the rest of the Champions League matches today, and I'll see you soon.